Nightcast. Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth brings you the current news from the world today and how it relates to Bible prophecy. Understanding the end-time events leading to the peaceful world tomorrow. Ladies and gentlemen, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth.
Well, greetings, friends. We're back on long last after Feast of Tabernacles. Now, in the archive, I should say. We did do a remote broadcast from a secret location from another state last Thursday night. Now, we did not put that in the archive, so if you didn't see it live, then you just didn't see it. But here we are tonight, friends, on Sunday night, the 11th day of October 2015. With this edition of Nightcast, we open with a tragic situation over in the Middle East. There are fears for the safety of hundreds of vulnerable. Well, we're going to come to that story in the Middle East. Several stories out of the Middle East of major impact tonight. Interesting, the news right after the Feast of Tabernacles has some very, very serious overtures, as if things were perhaps going to just escalate from here. And mark my words, well, they may, unless God decides to delay it. If God does not decide to delay things, you're going to see things really spiral. But we're going to open with a story tonight related to the weather. There are fears for the safety of vulnerable orangutans in Indonesia as forest fires continue to rage across the country. The president there has asked for international assistance to put out the fires that have sent a thick haze over the region. Ben Bland reports. Well, and I think if you're going to report, we're going to have to make some changes here in the studio. Let's go over to a different bank of buttons, and let's see if there we go. We can get that player in from this bank. Okay, Ben Bland with this opening story.
Havoc for people and animals. There are fears for the safety of hundreds of vulnerable orangutans. Fires are burning just 60 meters away from their rehabilitation center in central Kalimantan province on Borneo Island. Conservationists are trying to move them to safety.
We
only have space for 20 orangutans at another centre, but it means we still have 118 orangutans that need evacuation space. So far, we still don't know where we can put them.
Millions of people across the region have been exposed to the resulting haze and pollution. More than 100,000 are said to be suffering from respiratory illnesses. The president has asked neighbouring countries for help to put out the fires. On Friday, Malaysia answered that call, sending a plane and a helicopter.
We hope to speed up the process of containing the fires with the help of our neighbouring country's aeroplane. It's able to carry 12 to 14 tons of water.
The fires are caused when forests are cleared and drained. The peat soil becomes so dry it starts to smoulder beneath the surface. These fires happen every year, but unusually dry conditions have made these even worse than normal. Ben Bland, BBC News.
And friends, one of the stories out of the Middle East that I mentioned is rather tragic tonight. Comes out of Turkey. Make sure I'm telling you that right. Yeah, comes out of Turkey, which is mourning victims of an Ankara bombing, which killed at least 95 people. Thousands of people were gathered in Ankara to remember the victims of the bomb blast, which killed at least 95 and injured 245. Of the injured, 48 are still in serious condition. There were brief scuffles with the police after some mourners tried to lay flowers at the site of the bombings. Mark Lowen reports from Ankara.
Lives stolen in an instant. It is too much to bear. In Ankara today, the reality of the horror sank in, and it was overwhelming. Families of those killed in Turkey's worst ever attack, taken to see the bodies of their loved ones and unable to speak. One mother is overcome with grief. I wish I were dead, he says. To witness this and to be alive now is too terrible. There is intense pain here, but also profound anger towards the state and towards the president, who they believe has divided this nation, pitted one side against the other, whipped up a frenzy of anti-Kurdish violence with such devastating consequences. The weekend began here with a rally for peace, ripped apart by twin blasts, killing dozens. The crime scene, Ankara train station, has reopened, already under repair. Perhaps too early, beneath the white card, new body parts found today. On the ground, a simple tribute, one for each victim. Among the mourners, defiance. Thousands gathered today, furious at the government for a lack of security, which they say allowed the bombers to strike. Tensions ran high, with rows over who was to blame.
I woke up this morning and I have realized yesterday was real, and the friends, comrades that we have lost will never be with us again.
And how does that make you feel?
Empty.
The leader of the pro-Kurdish HDP party said the government had blood on its hands, urging people to end President Erdogan's rule with next month's election. Turkey's tragedy runs deep, and the vulnerable country is asking who would strike at its very heart.
Friends, if that doesn't give you something to pray your heart out about tonight, I don't know what else could. And if it doesn't, where are you? Where are you? Where are your emotions? Those two blasts that killed at least 95 people occurred on the Sabbath, on Saturday, this Sabbath Saturday, as many of us correctly know it. Again, as we mentioned in the opening video, it left 245 people injured, 48 of which are in serious condition. The government called the attack a terrorist attack and angrily rejected allegations that the government itself was to blame. Protesters took to the streets overnight, setting fires in the street and throwing missiles at police. We've got another report on this one by Selin Garit.
After the deadliest attacks in Turkish history, the Turkish people have woken to a day of mourning. The government has declared 3 days of mourning in this country. People have been in mourning, but they are very angry as well. Yesterday, after the attacks towards the night, thousands took it to the streets across the country to show their anger, to show how furious they were. They were condemning, they were blaming the government as well for not taking enough precautions to prevent such an attack taking place in the middle of the capital city, Ankara. No group has yet claimed responsibility of the attacks. The Prime Minister, Ahmet Davutoğlu, initially said because of the scale of the attack, only groups such as the Kurdish militant group PKK or the Islamic State or a radical leftist organization could have conducted it because of its big scale and because of how it was conducted.
All right, thank you, Celine. And we've got an update just in on this. The Turkish Air Force has pounded Kurdish militants a day after a deadly bomb attack. So that would have been today. The Turkish airport, after that attack yesterday, the Turkish Air Force pounded Kurdish militants today, a day after that deadly bomb attack on a rally for peace in the capital, Ankara. Planes attacked Kurdistan Workers' Party, the Kurdistan Workers' Party, PKK, targets in both the southeast and over the border in northern Iraq. Saturday's twin bombing in Ankara that killed 95 people makes it the deadliest such attack in years. Security forces say they suspect the so-called Islamic State, IS, group was behind the attack. The Air Force struck after the government rejected a new ceasefire announced by the PKK on Saturday. Turkey was already tense before Saturday's attack, with a snap general election looming on November 1st. The governing Justice and Development Party, AKP, lost its overall majority in June after gains by the pro-Kurdish People's Democratic Party, HDP, which was involved in Saturday's rally. Everyone, quote, everyone came here to defend peace. Amit, whose sister died in the attack, told AFP news agency. Another person outside the morgue, Hava said, those who do not believe in brotherhood, those who don't believe in equality of the people of this country, are the ones who provoked what we saw yesterday in Ankara. And we have this photo is labeled to show you the scene of the blast, the Ankara railway station. There's an inset map that shows the relationship of Ankara to overall Turkey up in the upper left-hand corner of this photograph, of this graphic. Another story out of the Middle East with some significance to it relates to a country near and dear to many. And as soon as I get my control back, we'll switch that over to show you that. Now, for some reason, are we hung up? Let's see. Let me pull this forward for just a moment and then see if we can get this thing to release. Okay. Once in a while, this happens on a live program, friends. All right, I just got it. I just got control back of it. So let's move this over to this story out of Gaza, Middle East, related to Israel. Fresh violence between Palestinians and Israelis has seen 6 Palestinians shot dead in Gaza, reports say, and a fresh spate of stabbings. Israel said its troops fired over the Gaza border after coming under attack. Since last weekend, gun and knife attacks by Palestinians have left 4 Israelis dead and many wounded, while at least 3 Palestinians have been killed during clashes with security forces in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. I believe we've got a video report. My notes say we've got a video report with Orla Gurin reporting from Jerusalem.
Venting their anger on the streets today in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. In Ramallah, soldiers doing battle against protesters with slingshots. It's a familiar scene, but is another generation about to replay the bloodshed of the past.
Well, the confrontation here is escalating. There are Palestinian stone throwers on this side, Israeli security forces on the other. Rubber bullets have been used and there have been injuries taken away. The fear is that clashes like this could spread.
Some here already calling this the third intifada or uprising. Israeli security officials are playing that down, but the police are on alert, especially in Jerusalem's Old City. It's home to the Al-Aqsa Mosque, sacred to Muslims and Jews. Tensions over the shrine have fueled the latest unrest and unleashed a new danger for Israelis: stabbing attacks. This amateur video was filmed in the Old City last Saturday. The distant screams are from an Israeli woman whose husband had just been killed in a lone wolf knife attack. We met Adele Bennett in hospital, recovering from 13 stab wounds. Her young son, Natan, being treated alongside her. She says Palestinian bystanders ignored her desperate cries.
I searched for some humanity. I begged for help. I told them, please take the children. I was met with stares of hatred. They threw things at me, spat in my face, and shouted at me to die.
A short distance away in Bethlehem, a Palestinian mother mourns her son. Abdulrahman Obidullah, who was 13, was killed on Monday by Israeli troops. His mother, Dalal, being comforted by neighbours, denies there were clashes at the time. She says a sniper shot her son through the heart. She wants another uprising.
I hope there will be a third intifada, so we can have freedom. The injustice must stop. We are tired, and our children are tired. Every day someone gets killed. At night, my daughter is calling for her brother.
And there were more new dead in Gaza today, where 6 Palestinians were killed in clashes. The unrest is spreading, carried forward by those tired of waiting for a Palestinian state. Israel's president says both sides are sitting on a volcano. Orla Guerin, BBC News on the West Bank.
All right, thank you, Orla Guerin. Friends, that was from Friday. So when she said today, that was referring to Friday. And this story I have for you next comes from October 2nd, while we were in the last part of the Feast of Tabernacles. This news. During his speech to the United Nations General Assembly, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu found a novel way to protest against what he calls an absence of criticism of Iranian threats against Israel. Midway through his speech, Prime Minister Netanyahu paused for 44 seconds in response to what he describes as the international community's silence. Now we're going to roll this video. It's got a little music right on the beginning, and it's got some notes here that I'm going to read for those of you listening by podcast. It says, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is angry about the United Nations response to Iranian threats against Israel. During his UN speech, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu found a novel way to highlight the absence of criticism.
Deafening silence.
Was this the longest silence in a UN speech ever?
Perhaps you can now understand why Israel is not joining you in celebrating this deal.
Okay. Thank you, BBC, for a very effective video report. Friends, we go on now to North Korea. Trouble there. North Korea has held a massive torchlight parade to conclude the country's anniversary celebrations. North Korea has been marking the 70th anniversary of the Workers' Party. Thousands of people carrying burning torches marched in Pyongyang and made formations in the Kim Il-sung Square. Jill McGivering reports.
It was simply spectacular. As night fell, tens of thousands of North Koreans filled Pyongyang's main square, their blazing torches held high. This whole event marked the founding of the ruling Workers' Party 70 years ago by Kim Il-sung, national hero and the grandfather of the present leader Kim Jong-un. The lights spelled out the party's symbols and hurrah for the party. The young Kim's position is what all this massive display is really about. It's meant to foster national pride and unity and remind the powerful military who's really boss in North Korea. Earlier, there was a clear signal too to the outside world that North Korea is well stocked with tanks and missiles and disciplined troops, enough, it claims, to take on its most powerful enemies. In a rare public address, Kim Jong-un sounded typically defiant.
Iron spirit and the united forces of our army and people have enabled us to break through the imperialist sanctions and isolation. The party's revolutionary armament means we're ready to fight any kind of war waged by the US imperialists.
As the great day of celebration drew to a close, fireworks lit the sky. Just think how many days and weeks of rehearsals all this must have taken. Jill McGivering, BBC News.
Okay, thank you, Jill. And friends, I say, the potential problem because that's a military type of parade to celebrate their massive ability to conduct major warfare, even against the United States, potentially, somewhat. The Taliban has claimed responsibility for attacking a UK military convoy in the Afghan capital, Kabul, saying it was retaliation for airstrikes in Kunduz. The Taliban did not specifically mention Medicine Sans Frontiers, whose hospital in Kunduz was hit by U.S. airstrikes 8 days ago. Today's attack took place in a residential area and injured 7 people. There were no British casualties, the MOD said. And I believe, do we have video on this? Let's see if this is going to roll.
The Taliban went further to say that the attack on this residential area in Kabul this morning was in retaliation to what they said was bombardment in the city of Kunduz, which killed civilians and doctors. They stopped short of mentioning the MSF hospital, but the fact that they said civilians and doctors suggests that this is in retaliation to the airstrike on the hospital in Kunduz. The explosion happened in the early hours of this morning, about 9 o'clock this morning, local time. We heard it here where we are in Kabul. It was in a residential area, rush hour. This area, Joy Shear, also has an outdoor market, and police did confirm that this attack was targeting a foreign convoy. No word on fatalities. We do know that 7 people were injured, 1 woman and 1 child.
Okay, all right, we did have video, and it basically repeated everything I said to you, except that that area affected is pronounced Kunduz. All right, now the migrant crisis continues. Austrian Chancellor Werner Faymann has called for European solidarity over the migrant crisis while on a visit to the Greek island of Lesbos. Thousands of refugees continue to arrive in Europe, and Lesbos is the first entry point for many. Jim Muir reports.
After a bit of a lull during some rough weather, the boats are coming in again thick and fast, bringing with them several thousand people every day. The surge of arrivals is putting a massive strain on Greek resources. Just checking and registering all these newcomers before they travel on and providing them with the basics to survive is a huge task. That's what brought the Austrian chancellor here. He's the first European leader to visit what is one of the main gateways for migrants. Many of them later make their way through Austria. The Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras was there to show him round, despite his preoccupation with his country's crippling financial crisis. The two men were shown round the main facilities for processing the arrivals, some of them showing clear signs of distress. Others weren't shy about voicing their complaints to the Prime Minister. These were Iraqis who'd been taken to account for just Syrians and kept waiting for several days.
Don't worry, we fix it.
But the two men know that the wider problem isn't that easy to fix. This was primarily a visit of solidarity, Austria with Greece and both with the refugees. And they said it had to go further than that.
We should distribute them in a fair way. So there is also a question of solidarity. It's a question of solidarity to finance all these concepts and programs, to realize them, and on the other hand, to distribute them. And so I think we have to decide solidarity or against each other. And I think there is no alternative to solidarity.
So the politicians have been and gone, and nothing much has changed here on the ground. The refugees are still here, and of course more will be coming. What they did agree on was some measures to speed up the registration, the processing of these migrants. But beyond that, everything the two leaders had to say reflected their belief that this is a massive problem confronting all of Europe, and it has to be addressed on a pan-European basis. Jim Muir, BBC News, Lesbos.
Okay, thank you, Jim Muir. Friends, most of our news tonight here on Nightcast related to the second seal, which is depicted by a red horse in the book of Revelation, which Jesus Christ described in plain language in three of the Gospels, Matthew 24, Mark 13, Luke 21, as war, rumors of war and world war. And, of course, some of it with mob seditions, internal civil type war. That also relates to the fourth seal, the pale horse, with a rider whose name is Death, alongside whom rides Hades, or Hell, the grave. And one of its characteristics, beside the main characteristic that Jesus Christ called loimos in the Greek language, meaning disease epidemics, pestilence, the plagues of Egypt, he also said there would be seismic activity, commotions in the air, gale force winds of all kinds, commotions on the ground, earthquakes, and other seismic activities, volcanic eruptions, tsunamis, wildfire, floods, etc. But he also said there would be terike, trouble, not the mega trouble, not the major trouble of the great tribulation, fifth seal, a time of trouble so great that none has been like it since the beginning of the world, no nor ever after shall be related to this present time. Thank goodness. But just trouble. The fourth seal is just trouble, mob, sedition, that kind of thing. Some of tonight's stories could have related to that. And, of course, the kind of war that's coming, we already know in the sorry, I hit an extra button in there between our chart. Let's do that again. We're supposed to come back like this. Okay. We know there's already news in the works to indicate that there could be trouble in the United States of the kind that people could be killed by the sword. And they will be, unless the nation repents of its major sins, one of which is endorsing same-sex relationships as if they could be sanctified in marriage, which is not marriage, no matter what the political correctness or whatever, no matter what the government says, a man's government, because God instituted marriage, and man's government has no right, no authority to change what God created and instituted. And he said it's between a man and a woman. And he also says that sexual relations should only be between a man and his wife, not between a man and a man or a woman and a woman. And even worse, not between a man or a woman and a beast. But any sexual relations between a man and a man or a woman and a woman, no matter what kind of labels or certifications you put over it from the government of man, it is not sanctified by marriage. And that does not excuse it from being an abomination to the great God, the Most High, who created man from the dust of the ground and then took a rib from his side and made woman for the man. And if we do not repent of such sins, and other sins too, because there are 10 commandments, including a 4th commandment, to remember the Sabbath day, to keep it holy, and God tells us which day of the week is the Sabbath. He says it is the 7th day of the week, not the 1st. And those who try to claim, yeah, well, the first day is really the 7th, use all kind of loony reasoning. Catholic Church would set you straight on it, as they did in a full-page ad in the New York Times some 100 years ago by Cardinal Gibbons, who taunted Protestants and saying, you won't find, from Genesis to Revelation, you won't find a single verse of Scripture that quantitatively authorizes the keeping of the first day of the week as the Sabbath. There's no, he says, in fact, in the Bible, you'll find that Saturday, the 7th day of the week, is the Sabbath, that the Lord God commanded to be kept holy, and to remember your Creator on that day and worship Him on that day, and to work the other 6 days, and to keep the rest of the commandments all 7 days, whether you be working during the first 6 days of the week or worshiping God on the 7th. You keep the rest of the other 9 commandments every day of the week, and you keep the 4th one every day of the week, but it tells you the first 6 to work, the 7th to rest and worship your Creator and don't work. But the popes in the United States, has been in the United States, making headway with blue sky laws, or encouraging that, so that the stage is being set for a time when the beast and the false prophet will say, if you work on Sunday, if you refuse to work on the Sabbath and rest on Sunday, or refuse to bow down before the beast, the image of the beast, then you are anathema to the church, and if history repeats itself, that beast will martyr you. And in the absence of that, you take the mark of the beast, and then you suffer this 7th seal, the 7 trumpets, and the last 3 trumpets, the first, second, third woe, and that last trumpet, the 7 last plagues, for those who take the mark of the beast during this time we're referring to. But that's to come. The first seal relates to the false prophet. We didn't really cover a lot on that, but that's behind the scene. That's in the works. Now, the United States has prophesied to have 1/3 of its people, and the UK too, so don't sit there and be laughing at us if you're in the UK. Both the UK and the United States are prophesied in Ezekiel 6:6 to have all of our cities laid waste. 1/3 of our people will be killed by the sword, by war, by nuclear bomb. 1/3 of our people will be killed by famine. That's represented by the 3rd seal, which Revelation depicts as a black horse, which Jesus Christ described in plain language as famine, scarcity of food. So you've got 1/3 going to be killed by famine and pestilence, 1/3 going to be killed by the sword, that's the 2nd seal, 1/3 killed by the 3rd and 4th seal, 1/3 killed by the 2nd seal, the red horse of war, and 1/3 taken captive. Many of the people will die in captivity. A few will be able, small percentage, maybe 10%, will be able to live on over into the world tomorrow. Now, we talk more about that on the weekends on our Sabbath.tv channel for those who are invited to be there. You need to contact me by email to find out more about that if you want to understand that more fully. But this last story tonight relates to what's potentially coming, because the things in prophecy for famine and scarcity of food doesn't come by just war, but it also comes by that. And war will come when our money goes out, just evaporates. And that's predicted to happen soon. And in the news from today, there's a story. Well, let me correct myself. This is from Friday, October 9, Friday, that is an interview with former U.S. Federal Reserve Chairman Ben Bernanke, who is saying in this story that in order to determine the cause of the 2008 financial crisis, he's saying investigators should examine individuals rather than companies. In this excerpt from this interview on the BBC, you'll hear him say, I think it would have been better for the Department of Justice to focus more on individual decision-making rather than penalizing firms as a whole. Mr. Bernanke told the BBC's Laura Travelin in this report. Mr. Bernanke ran the U.S. Federal Reserve Bank from 2006 to 2014 and chronicles his experience in his new book, The Courage to Act. Here are the excerpts we have for you, about 5 minutes worth to wrap up tonight's program.
Ben Bernanke, in this book, you compare leading the US Federal Reserve during the financial crisis to trying not to drive a car off the bridge. Just how close did the American financial system come to complete collapse?
Well, I think we came very close, unfortunately. I mean, after Lehman, the system, which was already in a degree of panic, went into extraordinary panic and came very close to nearly shutting down. And the effect on the U.S. economy was almost immediate. We saw a tremendous job lost in the last few months of 2008.
Now, you were able to save that insurance giant, AIG, but you were not able to save the bank Lehman Brothers. And the public perception at the time was that you just let Lehman fail. But was it the case that actually you couldn't save them?
No, as I go into great detail in the book, we just didn't have the authorities. With Bear Stearns earlier that year, we had a purchaser that came in, another firm that bought the firm. In this case, we had two prospective purchasers, but both fell through. We didn't have any capital to invest in Lehman because this was before the Congress had passed the TARP, which provided money for capital investments. And Lehman didn't have enough collateral to justify the lending that would have taken to offset the huge run that was ongoing. So we knew it was going to be a very damaging event. We were very concerned about it, but we just didn't have the tools to prevent it from collapsing.
And yet those that you could help, AIG, you write in the book that you were seething when you saw how irresponsible or clueless those executives had been. Do you think that those people leading that company should have faced some kind of penalty for what they did?
You have to make a distinction between bad decision-making and criminal decision-making. They're not necessarily the same thing. But as I've said a couple of times now, I do think it would have been better for the Department of Justice to focus more on individual decision-making rather than penalizing firms as a whole, because firms as a whole, of course, are not taking decisions. It's individuals who make decisions. And perhaps that would have given us more clarity about exactly whether these actions were irresponsible, illegal, whatever that
So maybe individuals should have gone to jail for what they did.
Well, some individuals did go to jail, but certainly we could have, got a better sense of what responsibility there was and whether what penalties would be appropriate for that.
You say in the book that you cringe whenever you saw that bumper sticker about Wall Street being bailed out. There's still anger about that today. I mean, it's incredibly hard to understand the roots of the financial crisis, and you do a great job of explaining it to the layman. But what do you say to people who, to this day, feel like rich bankers on Wall Street who get $1 million bonuses every year got bailed out, and little people are still suffering.
Well, I totally understand it. As I said, whenever I see a bumper sticker which said, "Where's my bailout?" I cringed, and I understand that people would be angry. I was angry. The reason we did what we did was to prevent the entire system from collapsing. I mean, I knew, because as an academic, I had studied financial panics, I studied the Great Depression. I knew if our financial system collapsed that the rest of the economy would not be far behind. And in fact, the impact of the crisis on the economy was just tremendous, even though we did arrest the crisis.
When you look to the future, do you think the changes that were made in the wake of this crisis will prevent this happening again?
I think it makes it less likely. I mean, I don't think you can avoid financial panics completely or indefinitely. My colleague Mervyn King was often quoted as saying that. But you can make them less dangerous, less frequent, and have less impact on the overall economy. And I think that the reforms, including international reforms, such as the big increases in capital that banks required to have, I think they make the system more resilient. So wherever the next shock comes from, and we don't know where that will be, the system will be better able to stand it without, creating such a destructive wave.
It looks like China's economy is slowing down. When you talk about where the next shock might come from, how vulnerable is the US economy to China's weak economy?
Well, the U.S. is not directly very vulnerable to China because we don't export very much to China. But indirectly, we are affected because many emerging markets are affected by China, both because they trade with China and because as commodity producers of oil or copper, when China slows down, the prices of those commodities falls, and that's bad for the emerging markets. So I think the main risk to the U.S. recovery right now is global. It's the slowing in the global economy. And the main financial risks in the world are probably, as the IMF has emphasized, in the emerging markets.
Ben Bernanke, thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Friends, and that's it for this Sunday night here on Nightcast. God willing and the creek don't rise, we'll be back again tomorrow night, Monday evening, with the day's current news related to the Bible and prophecy. Until next time, your host, Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth, saying so long and good night, friends.
You have been watching Nightcast with Stephen Lloyd Gilbreth. Nightcast can be seen Sunday through Thursday nights here on cogtv.org. Tonight's program is also available anytime on demand in the cogtv.org video archive.